One of the foundations of good teamwork, as we've seen in the Lego exercise and the survival exercise, is communication. Obviously, this is potentially trivial. Yeah, we need to communicate. Yes, we need to communicate more. We need to communicate better. Here's a process to understand communication and understand also where communication can break down. Because most of the time, teams don't work or relationships don't work because communication breaks down one way or the other. Sharing breaks down. Information doesn't get transmitted. That's what we looked at in the Lego exercise, that much of the information couldn't be transmitted almost. It was very hard to transmit it, especially if it works one way. And most organizations, unfortunately, go from top down. And much of the communication, the idea that maybe one person on the top has, like the designer of the Lego piece, does not necessarily get transmitted easily. Information loss is happening all the time. That's why telephone is such an interesting game to play. So let's look at the process and understand where those breakdowns can occur. The source, let's say in this case, the person that was designing the Lego, is encoding a message, the design, and that here can already fail. There is potential for failure in the encoding process. In the Lego exercise, we asked the person to make a picture and take a picture and give that to the next person. So the encoding of the message of the design was already slightly different from the original because it was a photo. And if you recall in the exercise, one of the people was just looking at one photo. And because of the photo, you couldn't really see what the original design looked like. So the encoding of the message already plays a big role. This is where much of our sort of loss of information can occur. Written language is a form of encoding. That doesn't mean that everything that the source might want to say is encoded. The message actually loses value. It's less information rich. Images typically encode more information. A combination of images and verbal communication and written communication can actually increase the likelihood that most of the message is going to be encoded. But that means more and more channels need to be occurring. Because a message is part of a channel in the way that you communicate, a lot of information can be lost through the channel. In the exercise, it was clear that some of the people weren't talking, right? So they didn't encode anything, so the message wasn't very clear. There was no real channel that could be facilitated with. But when they communicated, they oftentimes did it verbally. They tried to be very accurate in describing it. So that was the main channel of communication in the exercise that we've watched before, the survival exercise and the Lego exercise. Again, in the Lego exercise, we did have one person use an image, and so the channel was that. It was a visual channel. Clearly, once you've taken the picture, the receiver needs to decode that message. And every time when this is happening, there is a new source of information loss. What the receiver actually receives sometimes is as little as 12% of the original message. Sometimes when we're good, it's 50% of the message. If we use multiple channels, it could be more. But we have to be very intentional and understand that communication is prone to information loss. Because at every point in the process, at encoding, through the channel, through the decoding, through the ultimate reception of the message, there is a possibility of noise or information loss. So when the person in the Lego exercise receives the message, interprets it in a certain way, builds another Lego piece very different from the original one. We've basically mimicked this process, right? We have created a situation where information loss is occurring by design. And in the second exercise in the Lego, we allowed for feedback. We allowed for this to occur, to create the possibility for less information loss. You've seen in the first Lego exercise that really the second piece had almost nothing to do with the first. The receiver had received very little information from its origin, from the source, from the sender. And once we allowed for feedback loops, it got better, right? We decreased the possibilities for information loss, and people could talk to each other and check with each other and make sure that the encoding and decoding through the channels was correct. We still forced them, of course, to not do too many feedback loops, just for educational purposes, because in good teams, the communication that occurs is that many more feedback loops are installed. Many more channels of communication are used, so that failures of encoding and decoding, of speaking and listening, are reduced. I want to highlight this diagram here because when we communicate, we hope to be good communicators. And we need to understand that even despite our best intentions and maybe best speaking skills and enhanced listening skills, we still rely on feedback loops to make sure that most of the information comes through. The process, communication between two people by default is prone to create information loss. So you've seen this in the survival exercise, and you've seen this in the Lego exercise. And I hope that you can see that being intentional about it and understanding that this is just part of the process can help you design communication in a way that you minimize information loss.